My mom's girls' trip was actually a secret affair. A single accidental phone call shattered my entire family, revealing a secret so big it rewrote my entire life. A single accidental phone call shattered my entire family, revealing a secret so big it rewrote my entire life. My name is Lily, and I'm 19 years old. For as long as I can remember, my life has been a picture of suburban perfection. Not in a creepy Stepford kind of way, but in a way that felt genuinely warm and secure. My dad was the cornerstone of our family, a man with a booming laugh and hands that always seemed to smell of sawdust and motor oil. He worked hard, he loved my mom fiercely, and he adored me. My mom was the heart of our home, all soft smiles and the comforting scent of vanilla and cinnamon. She was the president of the PTA, the organizer of neighborhood block parties, the woman everyone seemed to love. And then there was Uncle Mark. He wasn't my real uncle, of course, but my dad's best friend since childhood. He was a permanent fixture at our dinner table, a constant presence at our holiday gatherings, and a man I had known and trusted my entire life. He was the fun one, the one who'd sneak me an extra cookie or teach me how to bait a fishing hook when we went on our annual camping trips. Our family unit felt solid, unbreakable, a fortress built on love and trust. Every year, like clockwork, my mom would go on her annual girls' trip with her two oldest friends, a week-long getaway to some sunny beach destination where they would, in her words, drink too much wine, read trashy novels, and forget they had husbands and children for a while. My dad would always wave her off with a fond smile, telling her to have the time of her life. It was their tradition, a sacred part of their marriage that everyone respected. This year, they were in Miami. My mom had been sending a few photos to the family group chat, pictures of her feet by the pool, a colorful cocktail with a little umbrella, a sunset over the ocean. It all seemed perfectly normal. I was in my room scrolling through my phone, trying to decide on a dress for an upcoming college formal. I found one I really liked, and my first instinct, as it always was to get my mom's opinion. I knew she was busy, but I figured I could quickly show her the dress on a video call. It would only take a second. I tapped her name in my contacts and hit the FaceTime button. The phone rang a few times, and I expected it to go to voicemail, but then the screen connected. But the image that loaded wasn't my mom laughing on a beach with her friends. The background was a generic hotel room, all beige walls and nondescript art. My mom's face filled the screen, but it wasn't the relaxed, happy face from the pool pictures. Her eyes were wide with a look of sheer panic, her hair slightly messy. She was whispering my name, her voice urgent and strained, telling me she couldn't talk. But before she could hang up, I saw it. A man's arm draped over her shoulder, a familiar silver watch with a distinctive scratch on the face, glinting in the lamplight. A watch I had seen 1,000 times. And then a deep, familiar voice in the background, asking who was on the phone. It was Uncle Mark. The call ended abruptly, the screen going black and leaving me staring at my own reflection, my mouth agape in a silent scream. My world didn't just tilt on its axis, it fractured into a million tiny, incomprehensible pieces. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I just sat there on my bed, the phone growing heavy in my hand, my mind replaying the 5-second video call on a relentless, torturous loop. The panic in my mom's eyes, the sterile hotel room, Uncle Mark's voice, that watch. It couldn't be. It was a mistake. Maybe her friends had invited a few other people and Mark just happened to be in Miami on business and ran into them. It was a crazy coincidence, a 1 in a million fluke. My brain scrambled for any logical explanation that could stitch my reality back together. But the look on my mom's face told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't a look of surprise. It was a look of being caught. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My hands started shaking, and I had to put my phone down. The perfect picture of my family was now smeared, ugly, and distorted. I couldn't breathe. I stood up and paced my room, my thoughts a chaotic storm. I had to know more. I needed proof, something to confirm or deny the horrifying suspicion that was taking root in my soul. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I navigated to my mom's social media pages. I scanned her recent posts and the posts she was tagged in. There were a few generic pictures from her friends' accounts, a group shot from a restaurant where my mom was barely visible on the edge, a photo of a beach scene that could have been taken from anywhere. But there were no pictures of the three of them together, no candid shots laughing by the pool, no group selfies. It was all strangely curated, strangely impersonal. It felt staged. My mind started working backward, digging through years of memories, searching for clues I had missed. I remembered last Christmas when I walked into the kitchen and saw my mom and Uncle Mark talking by the sink. They had been laughing, but when I entered, they both went quiet, exchanging a look that I couldn't decipher at the time. I remembered the time my dad was out of town on a business trip and Uncle Mark had stopped by to help Mom with a leaky faucet, staying for a late dinner. I remembered the inside jokes between them, the little glances they shared across a crowded room. All those little moments, which I had dismissed as nothing more than the easy familiarity of old friends, now seemed sinister, loaded with a hidden meaning that made my stomach churn. For the next 2 days, I lived in a state of quiet dread. My dad, completely oblivious, would cheerfully ask if I'd heard from Mom, telling me how much he missed her. Each time he spoke, a fresh wave of guilt and anger washed over me. I was the keeper of a terrible secret, a secret that had the power to annihilate the man who thought I was his little girl. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare that no one else could see. Finally, the day of her return arrived. I watched from my window as my dad's car pulled out of the driveway, on his way to the airport to pick her up. An hour later, they walked through the door, my mom tan and smiling, carrying a suitcase full of souvenirs. She hugged me, smelling of sunscreen and expensive perfume, and asked me how my week had been. She acted as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't been caught in a hotel room with my dad's best friend just 2 days earlier. And in that moment, I knew. I couldn't let this go. I had to confront her. The lie was too big, the betrayal too deep to be ignored. Waiting for the right moment felt like a slow-motion torture. My dad was home, buzzing around my mom, happy to have her back, making her a cup of tea and asking her about her trip. She played her part flawlessly, recounting fabricated stories about her friends, the restaurants they visited, the fun they had. Every word out of her mouth was a lie, and each one felt like a small dagger in my heart. I sat on the living room couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my entire being was focused on them. I felt like an outsider in my own home, a spectator watching a play where I was the only one who knew the tragic ending. Finally, around 8 o'clock, my dad announced he was going to the garage to work on a project. It was my chance. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took a deep breath, walked into the kitchen where my mom was rinsing her mug, and I simply asked her about the phone call. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out as a choked whisper. She turned around, her face a mask of confusion, and asked what I was talking about. I pushed, describing the call, the hotel room, the panic on her face. She tried to deflect, to brush it off as a bad connection, a misunderstanding. But I wasn't letting it go. I told her about the watch, the scratch on the face that I knew so well because my dad had helped Mark pick it out years ago. I told her I heard his voice. The mention of the watch was the key that unlocked her composure. The color drained from her face and her hand flew to her mouth. She leaned against the counter, her body trembling. The facade crumbled, and the woman standing before me was no longer the confident, put-together mother I knew, but a terrified, cornered woman. The tears started to fall, silently at first, then in great heaving sobs. She didn't deny it anymore. Through her tears, she began to confess. It wasn't the first time. It wasn't a crazy coincidence. She and Mark had been together, on and off, for 5 years. The annual girls' trip was their cover, a week every year where they could be together without suspicion. But it wasn't just once a year, she admitted. There were other times, late nights at the office, business trips, quick lunches when my dad was working. A secret double life that she had been living right under our noses. 5 years. The number echoed in my head. 5 years of lies, of deception, of making a fool out of my father. 5 years of looking him in the eye, telling him she loved him while sharing a bed with his best friend. The anger I felt was a physical thing, a hot, burning fire in my chest. I thought about all the times my dad had praised Mark, calling him the most loyal friend a man could have. The irony was so sickening it almost made me laugh. I turned to leave, unable to look at her, unable to breathe the same air. I was almost out of the kitchen when her voice, cracked and desperate, stopped me. She said there was something else, something I needed to know, something that would change everything I thought I knew about myself. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and ominous. Something about me. I turned back slowly, my body rigid with dread. What could possibly be worse than what she had already told me? My mind raced to a list of horrifying possibilities, but none of them could have prepared me for the truth. She motioned for me to sit down at the kitchen table, her hands still shaking. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a depth of sorrow and regret that was almost palpable. She started talking, her voice low and halting, as if each word was physically painful to say. She began by talking about her relationship with my dad, describing a period of deep unhappiness and emotional distance many years ago, long before the 5-year affair she had just confessed to. She said she felt lonely, unseen, and desperate for a connection. And during that time, she had turned to Mark. He was there for her, she explained, a shoulder to cry on, a friend who listened. Their friendship, she claimed, had blossomed into something more, a brief, intense affair born out of mutual loneliness. She insisted it had ended, that she and my dad had worked through their problems and recommitted to their marriage, and that she had sworn it would never happen again. But then, she said, the 5-year affair had begun. A rekindling of an old flame that she couldn't seem to extinguish. As she spoke, I was trying to piece together the timeline. This other affair, the original one, must have happened around the time I was conceived. A cold, terrifying thought began to form in the back of my mind, a thought so monstrous I immediately tried to push it away. But then she looked me straight in the eye, and with a final, devastating whisper, she confirmed my deepest fear. She told me that the man I had called Dad for 19 years, the man who had raised me, loved me, and cherished me as his own, was not my biological father. The room started to spin. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. It was as if the entire floor had dropped out from me, and I was falling into an endless, dark abyss. Every memory I had, every single moment of my life flashed before my eyes, but now they were all different, tainted by this new horrible knowledge. My father teaching me to ride a bike, my father tucking me in at night, my father crying at my high school graduation. None of it was what I thought it was. My entire identity, the very foundation of who I was, had been built on a lie. And then she delivered the final, crushing blow. The man who was my biological father, the man from that brief, long-ago affair, was Uncle Mark. The secret wasn't just about an affair. It was about my entire existence. The world went silent. My mother's lips were still moving, her face a canvas of anguish as she tried to explain, to justify, to somehow make sense of the incomprehensible. But I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could hear was the roaring in my ears, the sound of my own life shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Uncle Mark was my father, the man who had taught me to fish, the man whose booming laugh filled our home every Thanksgiving. The man I had known as my uncle was my real dad, and the man whose last name I bore, the man I loved more than anyone in the world, was a complete and total stranger to me, biologically speaking. The betrayal was so immense, so all-encompassing, it was almost abstract. It was a cosmic joke, a cruel twist of fate that no writer would ever dare to invent. My mother's voice faded back in, a torrent of desperate excuses. She talked about a moment of weakness, about a decision made in a panic to save her marriage and give her child a stable, loving home with a good man. She said she had planned to take this secret to her grave, that she had never intended for me to find out. She said she loved my dad, and she loved me, and she had done what she thought was best at the time. But all I could hear were the words of a coward, a woman who had chosen to live a lie and had forced everyone around her to live it with her. I pushed my chair back from the table and stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I looked at my mother, at the woman who had given birth to me, and I felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. The person I thought she was gone, replaced by the stranger who had orchestrated a decades-long deception. I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to my room, locking the door behind me. I sank to the floor, my back against the wood, and finally, the tears came. They weren't quiet tears of sadness. They were gut-wrenching sobs of rage and grief. I was grieving for the father I thought I had, for the family I thought I belonged to, for the life I thought I had lived. Everything was a lie. My name, my history, my very DNA.
I was a secret, a living, breathing embodiment of an affair. The next few days passed in a blur of silent agony. I stayed in my room, refusing to come out, ignoring my mother's pleading knocks on the door. I could hear her crying on the other side, but I had no sympathy left to give. My dad would come home from work, cheerful and oblivious, and ask why I was being so quiet. My mom would cover for me, telling him I was just stressed with college. The two of them would sit downstairs, watching television, acting like a normal couple, while the entire foundation of their lives was a rotting, festering secret. I felt like a ghost haunting my own home, a keeper of a truth that was too big, too destructive to be spoken aloud. I was trapped, caught between my mother's desperate plea for silence and the overwhelming, suffocating weight of the lie. I knew I couldn't live like this. Something had to give. The fragile, false peace of our home could not last. Living in that house became a special kind of hell. Every interaction was laced with a thick, unspoken tension. I felt like an actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for, forced to perform a role I no longer understood. When my dad was around, I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to smile when he told me he loved me, each word a fresh stab of pain. I saw him with new eyes now. I saw his kindness, his unwavering devotion to his family, and the thought of the cruel deception he was living made me feel physically ill. He didn't deserve this. He was a good man, the best man I knew, and he was being treated like a fool by the two people he trusted most in the world. My mother, on the other hand, had become a shadow of her former self. The vibrant, confident woman was gone, replaced by a nervous, guilt-ridden wreck. She would look at me with pleading, sorrowful eyes, but I would just turn away. I couldn't look at her without seeing the lie. And then there was Uncle Mark. He came over for dinner one night, as he often did. It was the first time I had seen him since the confrontation. Walking into the dining room and seeing him sitting there, in my dad's place at the head of the table, laughing at a story my dad was telling, was surreal. He wasn't my uncle anymore. He was my biological father. And yet he was just Mark, the same man he had always been. He smiled at me, asked me how college was going, completely unaware that I knew the truth. I just mumbled a one-word answer and stared at my plate, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. The weight of the secret was crushing me. I was carrying it for all of them, and it was too heavy a burden for one person to bear. My mother's plea echoed in my mind constantly. Don't tell him. It will destroy him. A part of me wanted to honor that. A part of me wanted to protect my dad from the heartbreak, to let him live out his days in the blissful ignorance of the perfect life he thought he had. But another part of me, a stronger, angrier part, knew that wasn't love. That was a different kind of cruelty. To let him continue to invest his heart and soul into a relationship built on a foundation of lies was to deny him his own reality. He deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. He deserved to make his own choices, to decide his own future. The secret wasn't mine to keep. It was his to know. The decision solidified in my mind over a sleepless night, watching the sun rise through my window. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. I couldn't be a co-conspirator in this betrayal. I had to tell him. It would be the most difficult conversation of my life, and it would almost certainly break his heart, but it was the only way to begin to dismantle the intricate web of deceit that had engulfed our family. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter the consequences. I chose a Saturday morning. My dad was in the garage, as he often was on weekends, puttering around with his tools. It was his sanctuary, a place of order and quiet focus. I walked in, the smell of gasoline and cut grass filling my senses. He was hunched over the engine of his classic car, a greasy rag in his hand. He smiled when he saw me, his face lighting up in that way it always did. I felt my heart clench. I asked him if we could talk for a minute, that it was important. He sensed the seriousness in my tone and wiped his hands on a clean rag, his expression growing concerned. We sat on two old stools in the corner of the garage, the morning sun streaming through the open door. I didn't know how to begin, so I just started talking, my voice trembling. I told him about the accidental phone call, about seeing Mom with Uncle Mark. I watched his face as I spoke, saw the confusion slowly give way to dawning horror. I told him about the 5-year affair, about the secret girls' trips. He didn't say a word. He just sat there, his face pale, his eyes fixed on some point on the concrete floor. When I finally got to the last part, the part about me, about Uncle Mark being my biological father, I thought I saw him physically break. It wasn't a loud, angry explosion. It was a quiet, devastating implosion. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek, and he just shook his head, a silent, involuntary gesture of utter disbelief and profound sorrow. The aftermath was a quiet, painful unraveling. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic scenes, just a deep, suffocating sadness that permeated every corner of our lives. My dad moved out that same day, packing a single bag and leaving without a word to my mother. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with a love that was now mingled with an unimaginable hurt, and he drove away. My mom was a wreck, a hollowed-out shell of the person she had been. The life she had so carefully constructed had crumbled, and she was left to stand in the ruins. Uncle Mark's life was also thrown into chaos. His wife left him, and his friendship with my dad, a bond that had lasted over 40 years, was irrevocably destroyed. In the weeks that followed, I tried to navigate the wreckage of my family. I met with my dad, the man who raised me, in coffee shops and parks. Our conversations were stilted, awkward, but the love was still there, buried beneath the pain. He told me that no matter what, I would always be his daughter, and in that moment, I knew that biology meant nothing. He was and always would be my real father. My relationship with my biological father, Mark, was more complicated. We met a few times, tentative and uncomfortable. There was no easy connection, no instant paternal bond. There was just two strangers linked by a secret and a shared history of pain. My family wasn't perfect anymore. It was broken, perhaps beyond repair, but it was real. The lies were gone, and in their place was a difficult, messy, and heartbreaking truth. I had lost the family I thought I had, but in facing the reality of what remained, I had finally found myself.